Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Ms. Sara. Sara, how are you this most fantastic and wonderful day?
I'm very well, thank you, Nick.
And I'm also, of course, joined by the only man with a greater beard than me at the Institute for Race Relations, Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you, sir?
Flattery that makes my Monday. Make Mondays great.
Excellent. Well, so let's dive right into the news. There was an awful lot of stuff to pick from today. So hopefully we've chosen the most interesting stories. But at Gabriel's insistence, we want to talk about what I think we could probably call some good news. I saw someone last week despairing that there was no good news. Well, here's our attempt to show you some good news. Gabriel, you put out, I think, a press statement on, what was it, Friday, on behalf of the IRR about this issue. Please tell us exactly what the good news is and why you're so happy about it.
So the good news is that Eskom cancelled BEE. Yay. Also process. Okay, so that's the too long didn't read version. Here's the long version. Our honest communist Pravin Gordhan in 2017, when he was Minister of Finance in the Treasury, he passed a bunch of regulations to say you are not allowed to offer to sell more for less if you're a white business. Okay? Like it's not just BEE, it's like you're not even allowed to make the offer. You cannot bid. So it's before, in the old system, the old procurement BEE system, you would go to the government and you'd say, you guys are looking for 100,000 toilet rolls or 1 million liters of diesel to burn in the next 5 minutes of load shedding or whatever it is. And we will sell it to you for X. And someone else will sell it to you for 2X, and you should buy it from us because it's half as much. But if you follow the BEE point system, if you're within 10% of the price range for a large contract or within 20% of a small contract, then the government prefers the black business over the white business. So it was sort of a way of trying to balance the need for transformation, as it's called in the Constitution, not in the Constitution, in most people's way of interpreting the Constitution versus maximizing value for money. This was the sort of compromise. And Pravin Gordhan said, it's not working because people keep telling us, I don't know what exactly his reasoning was, but it seemed like his problem was that people keep telling us how cheap you can buy this for. Like Enoch Godongwana had complained, Gwede Mantashe had said this thing of selling water for 27 Rand when it only costs 3 Rand, it's not working for us. And Pravin Gordhan's solution was like,
it was making some bidders look very bad, right?
Yeah, it's like, this is looking awful. All these companies that are coming to say, look, you could buy this for very cheap, actually. That was not working out nicely for the government. So Pravin Gordhan said, you're not allowed to tell us. It's like a don't ask, don't tell US policy about homosexuality in the army, excepting about how much it costs to buy toilet paper for the government. And this went to the Supreme Court of Appeals, and they said that's definitely not non-racial. It's definitely not transparent. It's definitely not a good way to run a government. So you can't do it. It's unconstitutional. Then it went all the way to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court said, in a very limited technical sense, they just said, the minister's not allowed to pass this rule. Maybe the parliament can, maybe it can't. That kind of remains an open question from the Constitutional Court's point of view. But the minister can't do it. So that struck down all of the 2017 regulations. So then there was a bit of confusion. Well, now with all of those regulations struck down, not just the pre-qualification criteria, but all of the regulations struck down, because the Concord said the minister can't do any of these regulations. The question then became, how can government go about being sort of racist in the way that it buys things if it no longer has these regulations to support it? And the answer came from our Director General, Dondo Mokgajane of the Treasury. And the answer was, if we can't be a little bit racist, we're not going to do anything at all. No tenders a complete moratorium and freeze on all new government tenders in all organs of state, which includes all universities that are owned by the government, all provincial departments, all municipal departments, all state-owned enterprises. It adds up. I mean, government spending every year is roughly 35% of GDP, depending on how you count it. Now, a lot of that's salaries, and that's not affected. But in terms of the tenders, I mean, it's at least 100 billion rand, and it's probably more. Okay, so potentially freezing all of this is a big deal. And we at the IRR said, guys, that's crazy. Clearly, I mean, it's one thing to say 10% extra for black businesses or 20% for black businesses. It's worse to say, don't even tell us how much it costs if you're a white business, which is what got on. But the worst idea is that it's literally better to not buy anything than to move forward in this state of uncertainty by buying without a BEE point system. And Transnet and Eskom both appealed to the Treasury to say, can we go ahead with no BEE points? Because it looks like all of the regulations have been struck down until the new ones are put in place. Can we just go ahead with no points? And Godongwana did exactly what we recommended, what the law empowers him to do, what we used Raymond Zondo's report to justify as the correct thing to do, which is to exempt organs of state from preferential procurement in the national interest. And Zondo's commission said it's always in the national interest, actually, to maximize value for money. But we said if it's always in the national interest, it's especially in the national interest if the only alternative is to cancel all government. So the final summary was the options were cancel government or cancel BEE, like make load shedding all of the time, or like keep Eskom going, but without BEE. And Eskom said, well, let's keep going without BEE. And I think that South Africans should lean out the window and smell the fresh air. The country is still going without BEE in those really important departments. And if we have our way, we're gonna grow on that sort of merit, value for money, penny pinching sort of system. It's what our surveys show most people want, and it's definitely in the interest of most people.
So, Sara, Gabriel and I have talked a little bit about this beforehand, and Gabriel's talked in some of our internal meetings here. And so correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth here, Gabriel, but you feel like this could be an important moment in the battle of ideas and the debate over BEE that could show the country, as you said, we're still here, despite the fact that, we don't have BEE on Transnet and Eskom, even if only temporarily. Sara, do you agree that this could be a turning point? What's your thoughts?
I would love to agree that it could be a turning point. I suppose it'll be a turning point if for some reason things go along and the government somehow decides it's not worth going back to implementing BEE as a criterion for tenders. The only reason I'm sort of a little bit, I'd love to be more optimistic about it, and so we may as well enjoy it while we can, is because the ANC has made such a song and dance routine about BEE and BEE as far as tenders go, and with the employment equity bill coming up that's supposed to hobble the private sector as well. I think I'm not hopeful that it will last forever, but I am hopeful that at least those large, very poorly managed, very poorly run state-owned enterprises will actually get to feel how much easier it is to manage that whole procurement process when they don't have to factor BEE in, and they can actually go for things that logically most need to be done, which are, the best possible outcome for the populace. I mean, I think the great example of sort of the iniquities of BEE procurement or BEE in procurement was, I think, SAA a few years ago. They were spending I don't know what it was. It was 58 Rand on a bottle of water. And obviously we're buying lots of them. And so lots of 58 Rands were being spent on this.
Better be some good water.
It better be some damn good water. But it's not just a case of
Government juice.
the over expenditure. It's, of course, the fact that as long as you have criteria that can unrealistically or unnaturally manipulate the process, corruption is going to meet up with cold-rate deployment, is going to meet up with BEE, and money is going to go anywhere but where it should do.
So, Gabriel, I guess one of the fears here is, I mean, it's unlikely that government is going to let this slide for too long. It remains to be seen, of course, but I'm sure that currently every entrepreneur and person who's benefited from the system so far is currently pressuring all of their friends inside government and the ANC to get these new regulations set up as quickly as possible. However, that remains to be seen whether they actually get it done. But is that all a risk that, considering that, Transnet and Eskom are not the best run enterprises in the world, that some defenders of BEE will say, let's say this period ends and they'll say, oh, things didn't really improve. It didn't make a big difference. Come on, guys. You said this would be a silver bullet and actually, everything's still broken. So kind of being BEE, oh, well, I guess we just have to keep it forever. Gabriel, your thoughts on that?
I think it's going to happen in a different way. I think they're going to want to ignore this little period. Any gains that are made, even if it's a 1% gain, is important. And you really can buy diesel, coal, quite a few things cheaper if you're really trying to maximize money. Remember, part of the BEE procurement thing is going to be about whether you buy from foreigners who are not counted as black, no matter what their race is. So I think that it goes more like this. Premier Sihle Zikalala makes his comments, which got a lot of KZN Premier got a lot of.
We discussed it on Thursday last week. Yeah.
To say, what does he say? He says the presidential veto and the Concord's veto over Parliament should be taken away. Now, I don't know anyone else who's calling for the president to exercise his veto, but we have been. So I don't think it's any coincidence. And what do we want the president to veto? The Employment Equity Amendment Bill, EEB. Why? Because it'll reintroduce Pravin Gordhan's 2017 regulations. It will make prices invisible so that you can no longer even tell how much extra it's costing to use this race-based system. I think that the battle is going to be fought in RET ideological language. As Sihle Zikalala did, it's a colonial thing to have a constitution. We're going to get back to Lindiwe Sisulu saying that if the court I'm surprised that it hasn't happened yet, but if it keeps happening, someone says, look, there has been an improvement at Transnet or Eskom, even a marginal 0.5% improvement, they're going to be accused of being a mentally deranged or mentally colonized African or whatever it was, the phrase that she used.
And it's funny that I agree with you, that's definitely going to be the argument. But of course, Sihle Zikalala also said in his comments that we should be more like the UK with our governance system.
Look, they've got a very interesting. We can get into the analysis of how parliamentary democracy works there, but the point is that this is not going to last forever. In fact, both the Treasury and Parliament are kind of racing through to try and bridge this gap as soon as possible. Because if this is allowed to continue for the next 6 months, I think it's going to be clear in the accounting books. It's not going to make load shedding go away, but you are going to be able to see it. Like diesel costs, coal costs, transport costs, you're going to see a difference there. Some auditor or accountant is going to be able to show that difference. So that gap needs to be closed as quickly as possible from the RET's point of view. And from our point of view, that means that our battle to keep this window open for as long as possible, and if possible, open it forever. Keep it, just pry it. Put in a block there to keep it open forever is very important. And I'll conclude our hard pitch by saying we have over 10,000 signatures to our petition to ask Ramaphosa to veto this unconstitutional EEB. If you haven't joined. If you have joined, thank you so much. We'll drop the link to that petition in the description. Thank you, Nicholas, for letting me hijack your show.
No. My pleasure, sir. My pleasure. Right. So let's go on to our next story for today. And of course, this is, I think it's quite an important story for kind of just showing the way that corruption has not been taken very seriously in South Africa, never mind all the ideological and policy missteps. So it was revealed in some parliamentary questioning last week that the boss of the Hawks, which government likes to hold up as its, the great replacement for the Scorpions, the sort of elite crime-busting unit. It's not clear, whether they are, but the Hawks have an enormous number of municipal corruption cases that they are currently looking into, 121. Which to me still seems a little bit low in terms of how much corruption is in municipalities. Hey, but 121 cases is a good solid start.
That's not even one per municipality.
Right. Presumably there are other cases not being investigated by the Hawks. However, in the questioning, it became apparent that the Hawks have an enormous shortfall in terms of staff. The Hawks currently have a staff of 2,642, but they think that they need another 2,690 in order to perform their work. Of this 2,642, only 1,500 are investigating officers. So considering all of the cases that the Hawks have to look into, they have something like 15 cases. So it's not just corruption cases, they are looking into other stuff too. They're like 15 cases per single investigative officer. Now, one gets the feeling that, maybe 1 or 2 per officer might be able to work, but 15? Some of those are just going to get left by the wayside. And of course, this means that the vast, vast majority of those are not going to be investigated for years, for months. And by the time anyone gets around to looking at the files, everyone involved is dead, moved out of the country, already, a billionaire, or the evidence has disappeared. And of course, Ramaphosa is supposed to be cleaning up the ANC, as you put it before the show, Gabriel. So cleaning up the ANC and the country. So let me start with you, Sara, and then I'll come to you, Gabriel. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it is an indication of how seriously the government, Cyril and or otherwise, takes resolving corruption. I've no doubt that they do need probably twice as many people working for them as they have. Interested in the figures you gave about the number of people who are investigating for the Hawks. One has to ask, what are the others doing? What do they do? Is it like often happens in the public sector? It's a masses of administration and not enough skills on the ground. That doesn't surprise me, because the same thing has happened with the NPA. The NPA has spoken about...
My favorite is government is filled with stakeholder liaisons. It's not clear what they actually do, but there's lots of them.
Well, I'd be very worried. I mean, and you're dealing with a flawed entity. I mean, it was very specifically put in place to replace the Scorpions, because it wasn't the Scorpions. It falls under the police. It's not independent. It doesn't work in the same way. The Scorpions had policemen and prosecutors working together. It's almost nothing like that. And it is, well, probably the first really... the first thing that really suggested where we were going under Jacob Zuma was when the ANC fell into line to disband the Scorpions. But it's the story of, when it's now apparent that it's the story of the Hawks as it is the story of the NPA. And, investigating cases to bring them to court, particularly criminal cases, is not easy. It needs manpower, it needs skills. And if you provide probably half the amount of manpower in any of the divisions that do it, you're also reducing their budgets, or not increasing them. I mean, I gather from the piece we read that the Hawks budget hasn't effectively changed since 2009. I mean, it's a wonderful example of you take corruption seriously, not for a second. And that's why Zondo was important, not because something is going to happen, but because I think Zondo was largely there. Although we certainly got to understand a lot more of what is happening, that's what we've done, is got to understand a lot more of what is happening. Trying to do anything about the consequences of that commission and what is happening depends on having the money and the resources that neither of the entities have. So you just can't get very far in that sort of situation.
Gabriel, your thoughts? What do you have to add? We've lost your sound, I'm afraid, sir.
Sorry.
So, there you go.
I'm back. I think it's pretty disappointing. It's just, it really follow the money, right? So firstly, follow the money in terms of the original corruption. A huge part of our beef with the race-based law is precisely what Sara was saying, is that when you create these perverse incentives, you create a situation ripe for rent-seeking, for kleptocratic, shady nepotism. We all know this. We've all been through it. So follow the money in that sense. It's all of this BE procurement stuff. It's not about trying to help poor people, especially not poor Black people. It's about an upper crust enriching itself. But then you have the knight in shining armor riding through, great promises. He's going to sort of stab the terrible dragon. He's going to excise the cancer. He's going to chase away the baddies, hound them down, all of the things you'd want someone to do. And, then you check his bill and he's put no petrol in the tank. Where are we going with this series of metaphors? We're going in circles. That's unfortunately the problem that we face. And the bitter part of it is that it kind of turns every victory into a bit of a defeat. So, there are investigations taking place. There are people in the Hawks. I'm sure there are good people there trying to do good work, and they will make some successes. But there's a terribly sustainable way in which abusive relationships keep going, which is that, the husband beats his wife 6 days a week, and then on the 7th day, he takes her for a coffee at the Mug and Bean and orders her favorite, velvet cake or something. And then she thinks, he still loves me. And then you fall right back into the trap, right? So what I mean to say is, if you have a profoundly corrupt system in which the Special Investigating Authority is given just enough resources to drip feed the media with the occasional good news story, but not enough to really change the balance of forces between the makers and the breakers, then that actually ends up being part of what sustains the terrible levels of corruption. It just looking at the numbers, it does seem like that's the position we're in. And I think it's a shame. It's a terrible shame for the country at large, and for those good people in the Hawks whose every victory is also somewhat undermined, even if they do get it all the way through.
Final thoughts, Sara. Sorry, muted, Sara.
I was trying to keep a helicopter away. I think Gabriel's right. I think the problem is that what one mustn't underestimate is the ability. Cyril Ramaphosa has a very distinct ability to say what people want to hear, and either he's lying or he really doesn't mean it, or he doesn't care one way or the other. You can choose the basis for it, but Cyril is not flushed with the benefit of truth telling. I've got to say, his delivery is sort of reassuring and calm and certain, but it doesn't necessarily mean it. I mean, I would imagine, in fact, and there's indications that it's already starting, that the RET faction is starting to attack Cyril's faction allegedly for the Zondo Commission outcomes. When Cyril says, as he did, that he wanted to be the president who did not disunify the ANC, kept the ANC together above being the president of the republic, I think in that respect we must believe him. I think he will, if somehow avoiding the crime beating authorities, if limiting their resources is what is necessary to keep the ANC together, I think that is what he will do.
Nick, can I just say one last thing? I just want to say, in my view, Cyril is the head of the RET faction. Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Lindiwe Sisulu was like the biggest Cyril friend, and she has been like the most RET person in 2022. The biggest RET idea was expropriation without compensation. He pushed that. So whether you go by personnel, the other faction needs a name. That's the one that needs another name. His faction is called RET. That's what it's Ramaphosa Economic Transformation. That's what it means.
Can I now absolutely agree with you? I think there's a lot of very lazy journalism going on where people talk about the RET and the reformers. There are no reformers. There is no reformers faction. There are personal enmities. There are fights to be had. There is power to be grabbed, but the aims and goals are the same.
Right. Maybe Cyril, anti-Cyril. I don't know. That probably doesn't encapsulate it all, but that's maybe a bit closer to the truth. An RET reform. All right, we're going to very quickly move on to our last story because we don't have a huge amount of time. I don't know how many people in the world know about the Solomon Islands. If you do know about them, you probably know about the role they played in the Second World War, where they were the scene of some very vicious fighting between the British, Australians, Americans, and Japanese, because these islands are sort of off the eastern coast of Papua New Guinea and they protect the northeastern approach to Australia. So they've been very strategic. However, very poor. 500,000 people live in those islands. It's a very, very sort of quiet and sleepy place of the world normally. However, after years and years, decades even, of basically being under the protection of Australia in terms of its security alliances, the Solomon Islands has decided that it is going to, quote, diversify its security relations beyond Australia, and is now looking at signing perhaps some sort of security agreement with China, which potentially could allow the construction of Chinese naval bases in the Solomon Islands. This has freaked out Australia, America, and even New Zealand, which, despite the fact that New Zealand traditionally takes a very dovish approach to global affairs and militaries, is very reliant on Australia and the US for its defense. And so the idea of a Chinese naval base just a bit north of New Zealand has freaked them out. And this has actually come out in a statement released by New Zealand's Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who has said that this is a very concerning development, that the Solomon Islands looks like it's moving closer towards China on this point. Opposition leaders in the Solomon Islands say that they warned the Australian government several months ago that China was likely to begin wooing the government of the Solomon Islands, and that the Australians did nothing to heed these warnings. So, Gabriel, let me briefly start with you. Should the Australians be worried?
Well, probably. I think the question is, should the little islanders there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean be worried that their leaders are making the right decision or the wrong decision? My sense is that the Solomon Island probably would have noticed two things in the last year. The one is Australia's decision to basically terminate a contract with France for substantial number of submarines to patrol that part of the world, which created a bad stink. Military analysts disagree. Some say that it was a smart move for the Australians to, go from diesel to nuclear, go from this contract to that, this contract with France to that contract with US. I think the US. Be that as it may, there was clearly terrible fracas between French diplomats and the rest, in a sense that, the alliance against China is not really about containing China. It's actually about the US just beefing itself up. Sort of an abandonment of principle in place of just another power dynamic. And if you think the US is not really about playing according to the rules of property rights and so on, then you might think, well, why should I prefer to be on their side to the Chinese side? At least the Chinese are honest about the fact that they're after raw power. Of course, the second big issue would be the one dominating world affairs today, which is the war in Ukraine, where it does seem like there have been some mistakes coming out of
Yes.
and I think that leaves little islanders in a position of thinking, well, maybe I'll just stick with a team that's, maybe I'll hedge my bets, which is what they seem to be doing. It's not, they haven't put the bases there yet. This is still very early days. I think that this is exactly what you should expect from a collapsing world order of rules, and a replacement with sort of lies from both sides.
Sara, in 30 seconds.
I imagine the Chinese are offering the islanders a lot of goodies and stuff for this. That's how the Chinese work. It's understandable. And the fact that New Zealand is getting its knickers in a twist is, to me, a sort of karma. It sort of hits up against their tendency to be woke. So, Jacinda, enjoy.
Right. Maybe there are large US warships with nuclear power to visit their ports for a change. Anyway, sorry, that's me taking cheap
10
shots
minutes
at the end of the show.
after the war starts, they'll be like, okay, you can come now. Come save us.
Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. We hope that you have a most excellent and fantastic day and week ahead, and we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Fringe Show. Have an excellent day, everyone. Cheers.